But just to preface the theme a little bit, I mean, we are going to go into discussing how to scale. But as Julia pointed out this morning, there's a bit of a gloom surrounding, where we are right now. I mean, this ain't 2019 anymore. There's a bit of global turmoil affecting supply chains. I mean, we have a very regulated market, as Kirsten was pointing to, which means we have a fragmented market. We have a lot of mandatory fees and insurance. I mean, scaling has gotten harder, and hardware was already hard. So obviously, this is not a problem you can throw people and money at. I mean, it comes down to much more smarter moves than that. And that's kind of what we want to try to discuss. And among you guys here, we hopefully have some of the answers to that. So before we dive into the actual topic, I want to ask you to introduce yourself and how your company actually contribute to scaling. And yeah, let's start with you, Haya.
Great, thank you. So I'm Haya Farward-Widri. I look after superpedestrian business globally across the US and Europe. For those who don't know superpedestrian, we're a shared mobility operator. We've been in the shared mobility space for almost 3 years. And before that, we come more from hardware and software. We were spun out of MIT more than 10 years ago. And I joined the company right at the start of the shared mobility 3 years ago and scaled our fleet across 60 cities globally.
Great.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yan Xu. I'm the VP of Sales for Share Market from Navi Technology. Right, so we are a manufacturer who produce all the micromobility products. We started it as a manufacturer OEM for Xiaomi micromobility products, and we actually share similar supply chain. Over 50% of supply chain from Naiba Segway. So we are new to the market, but we are trying to be innovative in micromobility industry.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. So, Knut, my name. I'm heading product for Amnify, and Amnify provides the IoT super network. So that's a cellular network, so network of networks, and we provide cellular access across the globe and multiple networks per country so that your devices stay always connected and enable your business. And we support our customers really from a few devices to hundreds of thousands of devices. And with our platform, you have the full power to do your business from day one and scale step by step how your business goes.
And I'm Bertrand. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of IDINO. IDINO is a European player in the identity verification world. I mean, we've got more than 400 employees nowadays working on a daily basis to improve our services. I mean, our role is quite simple. I mean, we either help companies in what I would call the nice to have solutions. So clearly, again, providing identity verification as a nice to have, or to companies that are highly regulated, with the must have solutions. So whenever, there is a need for identifying a customer remotely, for enabling its boarding on, well, our services will support this use case, in fact.
Thank you. All right, let's get into it. For those of you who attended Micromobility like a few years ago or more than that, I mean, scaling was all about the dots on the map and the number of vehicles. Discussion today is much more around, how do you actually scale with profit, or close to profit at least. So if we want to try to dig into what's the secret sauce that goes into that, I want to start with you, Haya. Since I mean, superpedestrian comes from hardware moving into operation, and you're one of the few that you can argue that is vertically integrated. I mean, where do you find profitability when you scale?
Yeah, so just to take a little bit of a step back and reflect on how you started, I think today money is not cheap. So money is not cheap to any of us. And I think, a lot of the people in the audience know that today we're in an environment where we have a lot of pressure from investors to actually be profitable, not in a year, but be profitable today. What for us worked really well, and I think it kind of served us as an advantage that we were a second mover. So initially coming as a second mover after already they've been 20 plus kind of shared scooter operators, we were a little bit worried that might be a disadvantage. How are we going to be able to scale? How are we going to be able to work with cities and deploy fleets? And everyone is going to ask, oh no, why another shared scooter operator? But it actually really served us as an advantage because it allows us to take time and kind of learn from mistakes and see, okay, what worked well, what didn't work well, what can we do better, how can we serve cities better, how can we work with our customers better? And we were a lot more selective in terms of our market. So we did not just say, okay, where can we deploy? We thought, where could we deploy where we could have a profitable and sustainable business? So we did not scale as fast. So actually, when I first joined, it took us quite some time, although we had the fleet shipped in a warehouse, and we were like, okay, let's think and let's work. And, we selected the first cities that we went into one by one after a lot of thought. And that really helped us. And we had conversations with them. It was not, the more, we're just going to put the fleet out there. It was more, we want to come, we want to partner with you, and we want to build a sustainable operation. So I think that is the first thing that really, served us, being a second mover. The second thing is our history in hardware. So because we manufacture our own hardware and we built a very sustainable vehicle, we really broke down vehicles and studied what makes them break, and then started right away with a vehicle that doesn't break as easily. Quite actually difficult to break it. Like, a lot of the design is quite funny. Like, the column is based on a baseball bat. Like, you cannot break it. And a lot of stress testing for the vehicle so that it's actually unbreakable in a way, which made it a bit bulky. I mean, I remember when I, decided to join, I was like, okay, this is not a toy. Good. But it is a bit bulky, but I really liked it because I felt safer, as a rider. And I thought, okay, I really want to join this company because I like the product they've built. So I think the hardware is the second thing. And I think that what you said, like being vertically integrated, we're the only company in the US that manages our own operations. We, hire all our staff, and we acquired another company that was a 3PL with quite a lot of experience. So I think our experience in hardware, software, operations has allowed us to have really healthy margins. And the fact that we did not throw money on the problem, but try to kind of solve the problem with looking at the business model and thinking what actually works, what doesn't, what are the margins in this market, can we actually be a player there, or do we have to stay away? And we've made some mistakes along the way. We've entered and exited just a couple of markets, but mostly we have been everywhere where we've entered, we've stayed, and we won a permit. And so I think that's what has been kind of some of the success factors, right. and building relationships with cities. That's the key one.
About the market you select and a vertically integrated part is.
Yeah.
Gotcha. For you, Jan, I mean, this is quite different because, I mean, you basically have to deal with this as customers, so they come to you with their scaling issues, right?
Yes.
And if I'm guessing off the top of my head, I mean, price is always going to be the issue,
Definitely.
right? And vehicle durability. But could you share some of the conversations you have with your customers in terms of scalability?
Well, as a manufacturer in the industry, in Navi technology, right, we have to deal with many different perspectives. For one, we have to deal with operator, and we have to think about connectivities, and then later we have to think about compliances with different tenders, right? But I think what's the most important part is that in order to run a business, we are either going to focus on the needs or the wants of customer right now, right? Today, we can no longer focus too much on the want parts, but focus more on the essential needs of the customers. So for that, we have developed something called cost matrix model, right? Where we have like a base model of an e-scooter or an e-bike, where the operator can come in and tell us, hey, because of a regulation, because of a tender, can we add on indication light? Yeah, that's possible, right? Can we add on maybe a signal light? Yeah, that's possible, right? Or maybe we can upgrade our own IoT and furthermore incorporate, add on AI functions. It's all possible. What we are trying to do is we are trying to take down the unnecessary. We are taking down all the unnecessary things to bare minimum. From there, we will talk to a different operator. What's super pedestrians needs, right? What's MFE on their connectivity? What should we do? And based on that, we can scale. Because only with a low cost vehicle, you are able to scale. And only from scaling, then we can improve the industry.
And when you say lower cost, I mean, that's always a balance, right? Durability and lower cost. I mean, if you want to add some, like, where is that perfect cost? Like, if you're able to.
Well, there's never a perfect cost, right? But as I mentioned earlier, we have to look into essential needs, right? We have to have the wheels, right? We have to have firm brakes, right?
Hope so.
We have to make sure the GPS is actually locating the vehicle, right? Because that's the property of the operator, right? So those essential needs, those basic functions will go through various reliability tests. And we have all the certification to prove it. Even though we are new to the industry, we are very attention to details.
Right.
We always benchmark the top manufacturer to our ideal competitors, right?
Okay.
So that's where we can survive.
Right.
Right.
Dude, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so for me, this cost and cost of money and devices is one dimension. But for me, when we talk about scale, it is repeating something which is working. Yeah, and this is the number one we should not forget here. And what needs to work is the customer experience. Yeah, and this goes to all the levels. So you mentioned the hardware, which obviously needs to work. It's the software services. Yeah, it's the app on the phone to activate something to do the ride. And it's also, and that's the other dimension we probably need to talk a lot about, is the environment. Yeah, so where do I park? Where do I pick up? Who pays the fine if something goes wrong? Yeah, so these kind of experiences are key that a service can actually scale. Yeah, because without that, all the Excel spreadsheets don't matter anymore, yeah? Because if no one wants it, it won't scale anyhow. Yeah? And I think this is a little bit the danger that we, the last 1.5 years, go a little bit back in this spreadsheet-driven approach and forget the customer experience.
You represent, a service that was very much one of the biggest problems in scaling in the early years. Running a scooter fleet in your local market with your local telco operator was kind of easy. And then once you start, producing in a different continent or you're branching out globally, you hit all kinds of pains, both in terms of services, but also, shutting down 2G over here or changes in protocols over there. What is it like today? Like, what are the current challenges in scaling from your perspective in terms of connectivity?
So the business well understood, I would say. Yeah? So
Right.
obviously it is connectivity stays always a challenge. Yeah? So the market is changing fast with new players and changing players. So it's more of the life cycle, which is the main challenge, what we see. Yeah? So the things like I want to assemble in China, ship for 6 months, and don't pay that time, and then how to activate one device in Israel and the other in Germany and the other one in the States, that's solved. Yeah? But the life cycle, we also need to talk about flexibility in the business models. If environments change regulatory, financially, where do you shift your fleet? Yeah? How do you get it from A to B? How can you activate it there? And also like with networks changing, protocols changing, sunset of networks. So that's the challenges we see where the industry is changing fast, and where you need to have some, let's say, a life cycle view, because this is the other dimension. You need to a sustainable way, and only if you achieve a certain year of service, you will actually reach these goals.
So I want to turn to something Julia mentioned this morning in her opening remarks, where how scaling and policy is a very interconnected kind of dance, if you will. And as Kirsten pointed out, most of the markets now are heavily regulated. And I was thinking about you, Bertrand, when I was trying to set up a bank account the other day and hit all these know your customer issues, and which is in banks, that is kind of like brought down the speed of everything. And I was just curious if there's a parallel into mobility, where we go from a market where nobody knows who the people are, they're all using it, they're all over the place, nobody knows who anyone is. Where do you see that change happening in terms of like IDing the actual person, how that relates to policy and permits?
Well, if you establish a parallel between, this regulated world that is financial services and clearly mobility, what happened, in 2013 or 2014, because these fintechs companies started their operations, there was this nice to have service, to remotely identify the end customers. But I would say fortunately or unfortunately, the regulator made it clear that it couldn't last forever. And if you look today to what has happened, clearly the regulator has imposed some requirements when dealing with remote customer onboarding, so that at the end, they can be sure that the process that will be in place will be equivalent to a face-to-face in a branch. And when looking at, would say, again, and if we take a good example, a very recent one, with the crypto players, this is the same thing, So all these crypto guys, the Binance, the Crypto.com, I would say, and they moved to France because the requirements there were higher than in the other countries.
Right.
And in case they fulfilled the requirements in France, then they were able to fulfill the requirements of the other regulator. And I think for me, when looking at how to scale your micromobility fleet, I mean, you all started, in a garage when dealing, with this KYC process. So yeah, you had a team of friends, who were revising or reviewing, manually the ID documents so that at the end, you can't validate the onboarding of the rider. I mean, if you've got 100, let's say 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 requests per day, of course, you're not a business process outsourcer. So when dealing with how to scale, you need to understand that sometimes you need to outsource some of the processes externally in order clearly to be able to scale your business. And I mean, regarding, I would say, this KYC process or whatever, this is clearly at the core of the reflection of many companies today. And again, when dealing with scaling, I mean, the big debate for you will be whether you want to go and set up your fleet, in France because the requirements are higher. But in this case, you will anticipate the changes in the regulation because all the processes that you're going to have are already compliant with what is requested in some strict countries, or whether you want to go ahead with, I would say, some low processes when dealing with this identification process. But then, there is a problem of perception. There are, many issues. And, well, I think that the market slowly, I was looking this morning, it took more than 20 years to impose a driving license to French drivers, So it was in 1899 that the driving license was imposed to someone to drive a car. And I think, that the reality of your market today is the same. The regulations today is banning the use of micromobility means because, there is no framework, no regulations around it. But be sure that the regulation will help a lot in, I would say, scaling then the business, and you need to be ready for this. So again, coming back to your question, I think that for me, the crypto currency company example is really the good one. These guys, they anticipated the regulation. They clearly applied some processes that were in line with the most demanding regulators so that at the end, they can deploy their services wherever.
Yeah. I just want to follow up with a very specific example of the knowing who the customer is and how you can connect sort of the city and the end user. Because, there's no secret that we're still not able to fully deal with parking is kind of creating a bit of backlash. And I know from a lot of operators that the parking tickets that's been accumulated is just assumed by the operator because we lack that way of connecting it to the end user, which I believe is a shame because, the parking norm is created by, the sanctions from the city to the end user. And I'm kind of guessing here that that's where you would be able to kind of bridge, that coming all together, right? I don't know. Are you involved in anything like this to actually make sure that the parking ticket reaches the end customer?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Gotcha.
No. But again, when scaling, you need to look at the use cases, that will come out of the usage by itself, so that at the end you can clearly apply and define the right processes and the right services.
I don't know if you were able to speak to that, Aya, but
Parking tickets?
Parking tickets.
Yeah,
Where they end
sure. I
up?
can stick to parking tickets. I think the problem with the parking in general, there are a couple of topics, right? The first thing is, since I'm going to talk from the perspective of scooters, since they're new, there are different rules in terms of where to park your vehicle. So we've done some surveys, and a lot of times the main reason why riders are not parking correctly is because they don't know how they're supposed to park. And it is kind of evolving. Like if you want, scooter riders to park in a car parking, you need to make a designated area. We have the technology, and many others also do, to make it clear on the map and kind of direct riders in the right, in the right direction to park. And kind of, teach them how to ride. But those rules have been evolving. They change. They're different from one city to another. Every city has their own perspective on it. And think of a rider, like where do you park your car? That is quite standard now, kind of globally. But where do you park your bike or scooter? That is still a little bit of, depending where you are. And sometimes riders simply don't know where they should park. So I think rider education is really key. And this is, where parking tickets come in. I think that, cities should take an approach of, okay, let's educate riders together and let's look at it from a data perspective and work with operators to say, let's give riders a chance, 1, 2, 3. Like we've implemented in some cities a 3-strike policy where we give them a warning the first time, the second time, and then third time we would fine them. And let's have the fine be corresponding to what they've done. So let's not fine them 200 euros for parking it like 1 meter away, from a parking location, because that's just not realistic when it's more than a car fine. So I think if you take it from that perspective, it could be really effective. And we've worked with cities to improve parking, and we've seen that over time, you could quite easily improve, compliance by 20, 30% to reach almost 95% compliance, which I think is really good for, a new mode of transport. I think where the problem becomes is if we don't have that conversation and instead just, tell the chef de police or the head of police, impound them and charge those companies, and then we get an invoice from 100,000 euros that we have to, pay, and then we think, actually, sorry, we cannot even operate here under those circumstances.
This is kind of related to the conversation we had about Paris, and Paris is coming up on the different panels. We're going to leave the big discussion for there, but I'm looking forward to that. But as you pointed out, coming back from Paris, I think both you and I feel that it's quite orderly. It's taken care of now, but still, we have a vote, not extending the permits there. And I get a feeling that we're kind of getting a reaction that is, 1 or 2 years delayed from, we're responding to what happened. I think that kind of relates to your point, Bertrand, are people ahead, thinking ahead, or are we kind of behind on responding to it? But since you're the only one here in the French market, what's your take on how we could be ahead?
As I said before, I live in Rennes, not in Paris, because Paris is not France. So I live in Brittany, it's quieter than Paris. But again, to me, it's quite, there is the perception of it, and I think, this ban in Paris was mainly driven by the perceptions of the Parisian people regarding the usage of, I would say, these e-scooters. Again, if you've got clear rules, if you drive your car, you can't drive more than 140 kilometers on a highway, and it's 80 kilometers. So, if there are some clear rules regarding the usage, then again, it comes back to the regulations, then, the perception will be different. Because clearly there will be some rules that apply to the usage in the street. Today, the only thing was there was a lot of communication around bad things, so they were showing all these e-scooters, in Paris, wherever, without any parking. Of course, there had been some accidents, so there was a lot of communication regarding these accidents. And because of the lack of rules again, such thing happens. So to me, to us, and it would be good for our business, by the way, clearly, the enablement, so the setting up of such rules, such legal framework will clearly help, because at the end, people won't comment anymore, This will be part of the daily basis. This is something that will be accepted because it will be regulated.
Yeah. So for the ones who still allow scooters in their cities, most, I've been speaking with some city officials in the last few years where they basically say it's getting harder and harder to differentiate the operators. And if you're not in this industry and if you squint a little bit, they all look the same, no offense. And it's especially on the vehicle side, like for a city official to understand what is really the difference here. And I'm just curious, and this is probably to you, Yen, in terms of scaling and winning the permits, how do you feel like the differentiation is going to happen? Because right now we've been in this kind of like consolidation. It reminds me of the smartphone, right? We're kind of all becoming the same.
Yes.
Where will the differentiation happen?
Differentiation is actually a challenge today because, how much can you do with different e-scooter, right? Mm-hmm. It's basically a vehicle with 2 wheels and a handlebar, right? But what we are trying to do is we are trying to be prepared for different scenario. Okay, so we have do a lot of joint ventures with different partners in regard to maybe additional add-on for the parking area, right? A wireless charging solution or cable charging solution, or even a designated parking areas for different scooters. But I think in order to be differentiated, it's really important from an operator's point of view. Do they want to have like a unique color on a scooter via CMF, right? Or do they want to have a different kind of marketing strategy in which they can provide free rides or notifications or do they want to stand out in some of the area in different cities, right? I think that's more important than simply producing a totally new e-scooters. Because again, in order to scale your fleets, one of the more important things today is profitability, right? So it's not about being so unique about your scooter anymore. It's about how you can scale sustainably, right? And that's something we have to think about, I think.
And yeah, go ahead.
I kind of want to. I want to say something about
Yeah,
this, but I
please.
kind of want to come back to Paris. I just and in general about like scooter perception. I think that with the point that you're making about it took few years, but it's hard to move away from perception. I think sometimes they say you never get a second chance to make a first impression, and I think that's a clear case of that. The first impression in people's mind, they're all over the place, they're thrown, and they're of no use, and that is really hard to move away from.
Right.
So I think that getting it right from the beginning is something that I've been really focusing on in markets where we introduce scooters, investing heavily in the beginning in rider education, parking patrollers, whatever it is that we can do, so that the first perception of this is good. And I think the second part of it is just it is change, it's a new mode of transport, and I think the biggest question is it today widely acceptable as a mode of transport, or do people still think it's a toy? And I want to quote.
Oh, please do.
Yeah, from 1911. It's a quote from Ferdinand Foch, who's a French army, and basically the quote says, "Airplanes are an interesting scientific toy, but they're of no military value." And I thought that was a very interesting quote when I came across it, because, referring to airplanes as an interesting scientific toy, for me, scooter is a mode of transport. I've almost never used a scooter to replace a walking trip. I would say, for me, is either Uber or a scooter. These are my kind of two choices. And it's if there is a scooter in a city, I'd rather enjoy the ride rather than be stuck in traffic. So it's a clear choice.
But you're touching upon something super important, which is scaling requires that you are able to develop over time. And then we're coming back to the challenge of, when we do train infrastructure, we think in the hundreds of years.
Exactly.
Scooters, 1 year.
Yeah.
Which is super tricky. And then, of course, now Rome, if I remember correctly, they awarded a permit for 3 years, which is like some of the longest we have, but still super short. So, I mean, that's interesting to hear from the panelists. What do you think is the right model for scaling? Is it do 1 by 1 year and allow for an extension? So if you do good, you will be there forever? Or should we aim for like more of these like 3 to 5 year, what do you feel is the right model for sustainable scaling?
No, I think you need way more time here, and you need this communication with the local authorities, because this is what I see which is not working. So I think this scooter ban topic is mostly also in the larger cities where you already have a conflict of being overcrowded and tourists versus locals. So I think there are also topics mixed. Yeah? So that's kind of reaction on another problem. And the other thing is, whenever you have it integrated into public transportation and other means of transportation, it works. And there's something you see in many German cities now, that it works better. Yeah? So it was also this initial hype and total mass and scooters everywhere. And then people started adding bicycles on top everywhere. But the bicycles started to have proper parking in places. And this is something you see more and more for the scooters now as well. And you suddenly see also that parking spaces close to subway stations get converted. So it's a slow process. Yeah. It takes investment, and not just from the vehicle side, but also from the communities. Right. So I think that is the secret sauce here, that you go into an overall transportation system which is built for the people and connects. Yeah. And so it's more like a platform thing. Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah. No, we're getting into the end here, so let's try to close this off by. Julia started by encouraging us to come together and imagine, the future we kind of want here. So if we're looking at scale, and thinking a few years ahead, what are the things you're most excited about? What are you thinking about in terms of scale, like based on where you are?
So for me, when I'm riding, my favorite part of the job is when I get to ride scooters in the city, and I'm always visualizing that there is like one car lane and then this huge bike, scooter, micro vehicle lane, and I'm always thinking, this is the future. Right. That's how I kind of visualize it. So I would think, really hundreds, thousands of scooters in, and other modes of transport. I don't think only scooters, bike, other micro vehicles that today we can't even imagine. Like, that's how I see it. So a lot more two-wheelers or individual vehicles. I think also moving away from this whole idea of ownership, like I don't own a car, but I do use a car sometimes, a shared car. And I find it super convenient to choose between bike, car, moped, scooter, whatever, public transport, whatever is convenient at the moment. And I think that freedom of choice and that convenience for people is where we need to kind of, move towards. So I'm hoping that we can have less congested cities and more kind of not tailored for one mode of transport, but kind of multiple.
So a combination of radical road allocation with incentivizing access models.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. How about you, Anne?
Well, to me, I think in order to think about scalability, it's better to think about customer experience, user experience, right? The moment you step on that e-scooter and you ride around, it's just something that cannot be replaced. Do you rather to take a bus to a location where it's fixed, or do you prefer to take an e-scooter to somewhere that's more flexible, right? Maybe that might not be as flexible in the future because of dedicated parking space, but the feeling of riding an e-scooter is just not comparable, right? So if we focus more on consumer experience, then that's going to be better than pushing as much e-scooter out as possible. Maybe we think about how to offer a better service in which customer will stand up better and talk to the city and say, hey, we want e-scooter as a new mode of transportation, a new mode of public transportation. Because to implement a bus structure in a city actually costs far more than simply implement a small fleet, right, of e-scooters, right?
But I just want to add on the dedicated parking spot, I don't think it per se goes against the flexibility, because it's just like when you have a car, you need to find a parking. When you have a scooter, we should implement that mindset in riders of I'm about to end my ride, let me check where is the closest parking location. That's what I do.
Yes.
When I'm about to end a ride, I'm like, okay, let me see. And yeah, that means I have to walk 5 minutes or 3 minutes. I think as long as there are enough of them and they're clear and visible and people know where to park, it should still keep the flexibility, I think, that comes with, what we call the free-floating mode.
Yeah.
But I think that requires a lot of efforts on both sides.
The one thing I really need to see go away is how we implement slow zones, because is there one thing that's killing the customer experience is when you're on your e-bike and the e-bike goes boom.
Yeah,
Terrible.
the geofences, right?
How about you, Knut?
Yeah, so I believe it's more on the commercial side when we look forward how it will transform, because I think the current models are just wrong by competing types of transportation. So I have bicycles, I have scooters, I have Uber, I have a public transportation, and I think this needs to be integrated. Yeah? And I think it comes from two sides. It will be locally integrated, so that you have certain cities with a great integrated concept, one app, one experience across different vehicles. Yeah? Or the other thing is actually that you will have larger brands like Ubers in this world, yeah, where you have that trust, because trust is at the end the number one thing for user experience. Yeah? When you're new to a place, so what's the name of the public transportation authority in Amsterdam? No one outside Amsterdam knows this. Yeah? So you need to Google that first, then you find the website, then you can install the app, and then you can see what you can do. Yeah, that's insane. Yeah, and if someone is good in SEO, yeah, then I find some other bad-looking website, half Dutch, half English, and I sign up for something which is not in Amsterdam. Yeah, so this is why people tend to go to Uber. Yeah, because that's the only trusted authority independent of where you are. Yeah, and maybe that's a different topic, but also Uber had some ups and downs, and I think this is also a good example that regulation just not always helps. Yeah. So that's a different topic.
Yeah.
Good. That's wrong.
Yeah, well, so on our side, we are certainly the first step when dealing, with the rider getting access to, I would say, a micromobility mean, and when looking at the future, and when looking at this customer experience again, I mean, it's not so easy, when it rains, when it's so sunny in Barcelona, to take a picture of its ID document and then, go and try to get this selfie made so that at the end, you can automate the service. I mean, to start with, we as a company are working on the concept of this reusable identities, this meaning, that at the end of the day, aligned with this EU regulation, around this wallet, will be able to offer clearly a service that will be an identity reusable for any service provider. I create it once, and then, through typing a PIN code, it will be reusable for everyone. I mean, this type of service, we've started to launch them again in the financial service. That is much advanced when dealing, with the requirements there. And it's all about then building the ecosystem, because if we want it to work, it's not us selling a service, to tier or to whoever, it's the ecosystem, of players in this world that clearly needs to adopt this technology so that at the end, the end user, he will have the choice whether to go with tiers, with Perpetualian, with some other companies, and he will do this only by typing his PIN code, because this will enable him to share its identity credential. So, that's the future, that's where the world is going, and here we are, happy to be on it.
Sounds like the common thread here is scaling is very much closely related to customer experience, which is kind of paraphrasing Horace, I believe it was Micromobility in Berlin, where he launched a whole measure micromobility growth in smiles, not miles. I think that's where we'll end. So big thanks to the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing.